She stood up for a 78-year-old biker when a group of wealthy teens mocked him. Instead of being thanked, she was fired on the spot, but just a few hours later, the ground shook as 500 bikers rolled into town. And what happened inside that cafe left everyone speechless. Stay with us until the end, because this story will restore your faith in courage, respect, and the power of community. And before we begin, tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed someone stand up against bullies? On the windswept coast of Seabrook, Maine stood a diner that was more than a place to eat. The Harbor Light Cafe had been perched on Main Street for half a century, its red roof and painted lighthouse mural as familiar as the tide itself. To locals, it wasn't just a cafe, it was the heartbeat of their small town. Among the clatter of dishes and the hiss of frying pans, Clara Whitaker had built her life. At 47, she wasn't just another waitress passing through. She had poured nearly 20 years into this place. Life hadn't been gentle with her. A boating accident had stolen her husband more than a decade ago, leaving her to raise her daughter, Leah, alone. But Clara refused to fold. She worked double shifts, smiled through weariness, and treated every customer like family. The cafe was her refuge, and in turn she became its soul. But times were changing. The Harbor Light had been founded by Mr. Cross, a man who believed that dignity was worth more than dollars. He had kept prices low so fishermen and widows could afford a warm meal. After his retirement, his son Daniel took control. Daniel saw none of the heart, only the numbers. Overnight, the chalkboard menu gave way to glossy printouts. Chowder was replaced with lobster bisque shooters, and regulars began to drift away. Clara watched it all with quiet heartbreak, holding on to the spirit of the place even as it slipped through her fingers. One stormy afternoon, the cafe's door swung open, letting in a gust of salt air. Ezekiel Zeke Rhodes, 78 years old, walked in with steady steps. His Harley gleamed with rain outside, and his leather jacket carried the weight of decades. To outsiders, he might look like just another old biker, but to Seabrook, Zeke was history. A veteran, a rider, and a man who had been part of the cafe since the day it opened. Clara greeted him with a smile that was more than habit. It was gratitude, though she didn't yet know how deep their stories were entwined. But as Zeke made his way toward his booth, laughter broke out from a corner table. A group of private school boys, their blazers crisp and their wallets fat, with their parents' money, were whispering loud enough for all to hear. "Look at Grandpa Easy Rider," one sneered. "Bet he can't even remember where he parked." Their voices dripped with mockery and their laughter spread like poison. Zeke, dignified as ever, ignored them. He removed his gloves and set them on the table, the lines in his face steady as stone. But Clara, who had known him for years, caught something others missed. The brief slump of his shoulders, the flicker of hurt in his eyes, and then one of the boys stuck out his foot. Clara moved fast, steadying Zeke before he stumbled. Something inside her snapped. She turned, eyes blazing, and her voice cut through the cafe. "That's enough. Pack up your things. The Harbor Light Cafe does not serve bullies." The cafe fell silent. The cafe's silence pressed down like a held breath. Forks froze midway to mouths. Even the hum of the old refrigerator seemed to quiet. All eyes turned toward Clara, a woman who had spent years quietly refilling coffee cups and offering tired fishermen. An encouraging smile, now standing firm in the middle of the floor, staring down boys who had never heard the word no. One of them scoffed, his arrogance as sharp as his voice. "Do you even know who my father is?" "He sits on the Seabrook Council." He leaned back in his chair as though the name alone should shield him. Clara didn't blink. "I don't care if he owns the lighthouse or the whole harbor. Respect is not optional here." Her voice didn't tremble. It carried the weight of late nights and lonely mornings, of every hardship she had endured without breaking. The boys shifted uneasily. They weren't used to being challenged, not in their expensive blazers, not in a town where their parents' money seemed to tilt the scales. Still, one smirked and pulled out his phone. "We'll see what my father thinks about this." Before Clara could reply, the swinging door burst open, and Daniel Cross stormed out from the back office. His face was already red, the vein in his temple pulsing. He had heard the raised voices and the word leave, and that was enough. To him, Clara wasn't a loyal waitress who had held the cafe together. For 2 decades, she was a problem interrupting his business model. "What's going on here?" he barked. The boys were quick to answer. "She tried to throw us out, just for having a little fun." Daniel turned to Clara, his voice cold, like a man who had long ago stopped listening to reason. "You can't just chase paying customers out, Clara. Apologize to them. Right now. Clara's hands curled at her sides. She thought of Leah, of the example she had always tried to set for her daughter. You don't bow to cruelty. You don't let injustice slide. She lifted her chin. No, Daniel. They tried to trip a 78-year-old man. That's not fun. It's dangerous. It's cruel. I won't apologize for protecting him. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had no patience for morality lessons. His cafe was supposed to cater to wealthy newcomers, not cling to the old crowd that barely tipped. Then you're finished here, he snapped. Get your things, you're fired. A ripple went through the cafe. The older customers exchanged shocked glances. A young mother covered her child's ears. Mr. Harris, who had eaten breakfast there every day for 20 years, muttered under his breath, disgraceful. But no one spoke aloud. Not yet. Zeke started to rise. His weathered hands braced on the table, but Clara gave him a small shake of her head. She wouldn't let him fight her battle. Not this one. With steady hands, she untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Then she turned to Zeke and offered a soft smile, one that said, I don't regret this, not for a second. Straightening her back, she walked out the door into the misty air, the bell above the cafe tinkling behind her. Daniel exhaled as if a weight had lifted. He turned back toward his office, ready to dismiss the scene as an inconvenience handled. But what he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was the fire he had just lit. Because Ezekiel Rhodes was not just an old man with a Harley. He was the founder of the Silverhawks Brotherhood, a club that stretched across New England. Their jackets weren't just leather. They carried decades of service. They had built homes after hurricanes, stocked food banks in harsh winters, and given countless families a second chance. To them, loyalty and respect weren't just words, they were law. And Daniel Cross had just broken that law in front of everyone. Zeke's phone buzzed. He lifted it slowly, his fingers steady. He spoke only a few words, but they carried like the rumble of an oncoming storm. Zeke ended the call and slipped his phone back into his jacket. His face was calm, almost too calm. The kind of calm that comes before thunder splits the sky. Inside the cafe, Daniel Cross strutted back to his office, convinced the matter was settled. The wealthy boys smirked, believing money always won. But the other customers whispered. Some were already texting their families. Clara was fired for defending Zeke. The story spread through town before the coffee on the counter went cold. Outside, Clara walked slowly down Main Street. She had no plan, no job, and no idea how she would explain this to Leah. But she didn't regret it. She had protected dignity, and that was enough. Still, her heart ached. The Harbor Light Cafe had been her second home. Now she stood in the fog with nothing but pride. An hour passed, then 2. And just when the town began to settle again, the first low growl rolled over the cobblestones. One motorcycle, then another, then 10 more. Shopkeepers paused, peering out of windows. Mothers pulled children closer. The sound thickened, rising like a storm at sea. Engines roared in unison as the Silverhawks Brotherhood arrived. And not just them. Clubs from across the state, men and women in leather vests, patched with years of history, rolled in by the dozens. The street filled with chrome and steel until the ground itself seemed to tremble. More than 500 motorcycles lined Main Street, their headlights cutting through the mist. Locals stood in stunned silence. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't chaos. It was something far more powerful, a statement. At the front, Zeke dismounted, his boots hitting the pavement with a weight Daniel couldn't begin to measure. He pushed open the cafe door, and behind him, the Silverhawks followed, filling every inch of the room with quiet, disciplined force. Daniel froze. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He had been chasing wealthy tourists, but now his cafe belonged to the very people he had cast aside. Zeke's voice was steady, deep enough to carry to every corner. This place once meant something. Your father built it for the fishermen, the widows, the working hands. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect. Silence followed. Then boots shifted, chairs scraped, and every eye turned toward the tall woman stepping forward, her vest heavy with patches earned over decades. I'm Susan Delgado, she said, president of the Silverhawks. We've spoken to your father. The Harbor Light Cafe is being sold to us. Papers are already in motion. Daniel's face drained of color. You can't... Susan cut him off with a smile that wasn't kind. It's done, and our first act as owners is simple. Clara Whitaker will be the new manager. The cafe erupted. Applause thundered. Boots pounded the floorboards. Daniel stood cornered, powerless in the place he thought he controlled. The roar of applause filled the Harbor Light Cafe, bouncing off its old wooden walls. For the first time in years, The diner felt alive again. Customers who had sat frozen earlier now clapped and cheered, their faces glowing with relief. Hope had returned, and it was stronger than any menu or price tag Daniel Cross had ever tried to sell. Daniel attempted to protest, his voice high with desperation. "This is my cafe," he shouted, gripping the counter as though it might anchor him. But Zeke stood tall, his tone calm and unyielding. "No, Daniel, it was your father's, and he remembers what it stood for. He's already signed it back to those who will honor it." The truth landed heavy. Daniel's face paled, and his shoulders sagged as he realized what he had lost. It wasn't just the cafe, it was the loyalty of an entire community. By nightfall, the story had already spread across town. Photos of 500 motorcycles lining Main Street appeared on social media feeds. Videos of Susan Delgado announcing Clara as the new manager traveled far beyond Seabrook, catching the attention of local news outlets. Headlines read, "Bikers defend Waitress, take back cafe for the town." What had started as a cruel moment between teenagers and an old man had transformed into a lesson in courage and unity. The wealthy boys who had mocked Zeke tried to hide from the attention, but shame has a way of burning through silence. A week later, they returned with their parents in tow. Their blazers were gone, their arrogance stripped away. One of them stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "We're sorry," he said to Zeke, and then turned to Clara. "We're sorry to you too." It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't demanded by their parents, it was genuine. Clara accepted the apology, not to excuse them, but because forgiveness was a seed Seabrook needed to plant if it wanted to grow stronger. Daniel's path turned out far differently. Stung by his loss, he poured his remaining savings into a sleek seaside fusion bistro across town. For a short while, curious tourists came, tempted by glossy advertisements and overpriced menus. But the food was cold, the atmosphere hollow, and the warmth of community absent. Within a year, the doors shut for good. Daniel faded from the town's memory, remembered only as the man who tried to strip Seabrook of its soul. The Harbor Light Cafe, by contrast, thrived. The Silverhawks made it their home base again, holding toy drives, fundraisers, and storm relief events right from its booths. Locals returned, filling the cafe with laughter and familiar chatter. A new sign hung proudly above the door, painted bold and bright, "Where every soul is seen." It became a promise that no one who entered would go unseen or unheard. On Tuesdays, Zeke always returned to his corner booth, a steaming plate of apple pie and black coffee before him. His quiet presence was a reminder that dignity survives even the harshest storms. Clara ran the cafe with warmth and pride, greeting every customer with the same smile that had carried her through decades of struggle. Leah, now a college graduate, worked weekends beside her mother, learning lessons not from lectures but from lived example. When people asked Clara how she found the strength to stand up that day, she always gave the same answer. Standing up for what's right may cost you something in the moment, but kindness, courage, and respect, they always find their way back to you. And as she spoke, she served those words the way she served her pie. Warm, simple, and unforgettable. The Harbor Light Cafe became more than just a diner again. It became a lighthouse for the entire town. The rows of motorcycles parked outside were no longer seen as intimidating, but as symbols of loyalty and protection. People would walk past, point to the chrome gleaming in the sun, and say to their children, "That's what respect looks like when it rides on two wheels." The Silverhawks had restored the cafe's heartbeat, but it was Clara who kept it alive day by day. For Leah, the lessons ran deeper than business or tradition. Watching her mother lose everything in an instant, only to gain it back through courage, gave her a blueprint for life. She often told her friends that the greatest inheritance her mother had ever given her wasn't money, but an unshakable truth, that integrity is worth more than comfort, and that courage is a currency that never runs out. Zeke, for his part, became something of a legend. To the younger generation, he was no longer just the gray-haired veteran with the Harley. He was the man who stood silently and let others discover the true meaning of strength. And each Tuesday, as he enjoyed his pie, new customers would join him, listening to his stories of storms weathered, both on the sea and in life. The Harbor Light sign stood as a daily reminder where every soul is seen. It wasn't just paint on wood. It was a promise written in the lives of everyone who crossed its threshold. Respect, once dismissed as old-fashioned, was now the currency of the cafe and of the town itself. And if you ask Clara today whether she regrets standing up that afternoon, her answer will come without hesitation. No, never. Because sometimes life tests you in small, ordinary moments. And if you find the courage to stand tall in those moments, the world has a way of standing with you. So remember this, standing up for what's right may cost you something in the moment, but kindness, respect, and courage always circle back, often in ways you could never imagine. Just ask Clara Whitaker. She'll tell you the story herself, over a steaming cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie. And if this story touched you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that stir the heart, and share this video with someone who believes, like Clara, that doing the right thing is never wasted. Because the more we share stories of kindness and courage, the brighter our own lighthouses will shine.